Right.
Hello, hello. It's online. Welcome to Tavern Talks. Get around, travelers. Welcome to Tavern Talks, the video podcast where game masters from around the world share their secrets, stories, and expertise on crafting the perfect tabletop role playing game TTRPG sessions. Okay, in this cozy virtual tavern, we will be sitting down with experienced GMs to swap tales and trade tips and dive into the art of creating unforgettable TTRPG experiences. So, from world building to NPC crafting, from session prep to improvisation, we'll cover it all. So, joining us today is Lim, Lou Lim. Am I pronouncing correctly? Sorry about that. And
You're
hailing
great.
from Boston,
Mhm.
Lou is a passionate GM with a wealth of experience in running immersive TTRPG sessions. He is here to share his insight uh, on what makes a great game from the, let's say, intricacies of both American and Turkish TTRPG culture to his favorite tips and tricks for keeping players engaged. So grab a pint of your favorite virtual ale, pull up a chair, and join the conversation in this episode. So we'll be chatting with Lou about his journey as a GM, his favorite TTRPG systems, and what he's learned from running games for players from diverse backgrounds, because that's what we are going to focus on. So let's get talking. So, how
No,
are
thank
you?
you for having me here. I'm doing great. Glad to be here in the Eastern time zone. So I'm happy to talk about my experience as a DM and anything you all want to know about the experience of Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop role player games, and my experience as a US GM, DM, Dungeon Master.
Okay, thank you. So, in this channel on YouTube, we call the Go Lab. We got you some questions.
Mhm.
So, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into tabletop play role playing games? Actually, with
Yeah.
the RPGs.
My name is Lou. I was born in the Philippines. I immigrated to the U.S. When I was 5 years old, and I grew up in this cultural context of being Chinese, Filipino, and American. And so I was realizing I knew a little bit more than I realized about tabletop role player games like D&D as far back as like the late 90s. I realized I was playing
Mm.
Dungeons and Dragons, like the video game, because apparently that was like on Sega Genesis. I was playing other adjacent games like Heroes of Might and Magic, that's like world building and exploring. And I realized that I tried D&D like in 2010, and I realized it was really stressful because I wasn't ready to
Oh.
play the game at the time because it kind of felt like I had to like make big decisions. I was like, you're a character in a world and you have 8 hours. What do you want to do first? And I'm like, when I was 10 years younger, 14 years younger, I was just like, I didn't have the bandwidth for this. And so I really started stepping into Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role player games in the past couple of years. So this is
Oh.
surprisingly a new hobby, a game for me. And so I started playing because my housemate during COVID, he was playing D&D with his friends in his room, and I was watching TV downstairs, and I could just hear him having so much fun, hooting, hollering, laughing, and I kind of like, what is he doing up there? And eventually he started telling me about his experience of playing D&D. And so I started playing because I asked him if he could run a table or a campaign for me and some of our shared friends. And so he ran that game, and I fell in
Mm.
love playing since then.
So, and it turned out to become a new hobby and a new lifestyle for you as well. So, I actually would ask you to, like, what sparked your interest or how long have you been playing? But you also answered, but if you want to add something about it, you can add some more here. Would you like
Yes,
to add something?
what piqued my interest in playing
Mm.
Dungeons and Dragons is this ability to be able to be somebody else, to be
Oh.
able to portray a different character. I actually also enjoy building character sheets. I like making up stories and trying to create creatures and people who can do really cool and amazing things. And
Mm.
also, some days my character sheets are mid maxing, and I want them to be like the best player possible. And sometimes my characters are fun and creative and unorthodox, and
Mhm.
wouldn't normally be in the world, but you want to have a real person, as real as a fantasy character can be, to navigate everyday
Mm.
situations. And so I really like the role play, the imagination, the acting, the
Mhm.
storytelling that D&D provides. Because I always like to tell people when they ask, what is Dungeons and Dragons? What is a tabletop role player game? And I think
Mhm.
the easiest way of describing it is that it's a collaborative storytelling game. So
Mm.
people telling a story, and they can use different tools, modules, gaming systems to do that.
Oh, got it, got it. Mm, so it's kind of had let's say that psychological side for you as well. Like it makes you feel better, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so when
Mm-hmm.
I'm not playing Dungeons and Dragons, I am an expressive arts therapist. So I'm a licensed
Mm.
therapist in the state of Massachusetts in the US. I'm registered as an expressive arts therapist with an international organization. And expressive arts therapy uses creativity and mental health. This could be visual art therapy, this could
Mm-hmm.
be music therapy, dance movement therapy, drama
Mm.
therapy. And I think some emerging research is the role or intersection of TTRPGs or tabletop role player games and mental health. And so I also was really excited to play D&D with aspirations on doing this as a clinical approach.
Mm. That's great, actually. I got lots of questions on this, but I'll separate it into another video, and we'll actually ask you to join me in another session. But for now, I'll ask you another question. So how did you prepare for your first game?
So my
That's a
first
big question, right?
So my first way of preparing is the classic. I'm over prepared. So I took maybe weeks of world building, developing plot lines and stories. But how do I actually start creating a world or a story? I kind of just chose something I was really excited about in my everyday life, and so it's funny. I kind of built the world based on my a favorite scotch I had when I traveled in
Mm.
2019, and it's from the Isle of Rothesay. And so I kind of pulled up the island of Rothesay in Scotland and kind of thought about like, okay, what kind of world would be in this place? And so I kind of chose a classic, okay, characters are trying to protect the town. And then I had to
Mhm.
decide who are the NPCs that live in this town. Why are the characters and the people playing this game want to be there? Who are the big bad evil guys? Who are the monsters who I want
Mhm.
them to encounter? And so this kind of just went into a world of like, okay, what's a story that I can tell from beginning, middle, and end, that if the characters and players weren't there, the story I could tell without them.
Yeah. Mhm.
However, a good story for D&D is, how do characters and players impact that story? How will they retell the story? I also try to make games where they can be replayed and retold, and you can get different outcomes. Most of the time when I run
Mhm.
one shots, they can be played multiple times, and I get different stories and outcomes to where I
Mhm.
can improve as a DM. But how to write that first story is one, thinking about something I really care about and making that into a story. So it's like a favorite food, a favorite drink,
Mm.
a place, a favorite memory, and trying to say what would happen if, and then kind of creating possibilities from there. It
Mhm.
also is level setting what kind of players you're working with. So if they're really experienced players, how can I make it stimulating and challenging? If they are
Mhm.
new players, how can I make the game simple and approachable, but still exciting? The classic, do I start players at level 1 or level 3? Level 1 is easier to manage, but just isn't as exciting and possibly more deadly for the game. So there's more stress at stake. Whereas level 3, there's more rules and learning, that it
Yeah.
gives players agency and choice and making more interesting decisions throughout. And then being flexible, that I wrote this original story with like 3 combats, and admittedly only 2 of them happened, and I had to truncate half the story. So it's about being
Mhm.
flexible with, when you make a story, trusting as a DM that your
Mhm.
characters and players are going to tell a fun story and possibly a better one than
Mhm.
the end. So it's writing a plot line, writing out the stat blocks, or having the
Mhm.
bookmarks on them, but regardless of what you have, being okay
Mhm.
with the players going in a different direction.
Mhm. So what actually piqued my interest in here is Actually, being flexible also creates some sort of a challenge, for a DM, and also that's why I just would like to ask about it. So, can you share what was your biggest challenge you faced as a new dungeon master, and how did you overcome them? Because being flexible is perfecting, and I really like, and I played one of your games, and you were really great on it. But have you ever encountered a challenge for like as a new DM, especially?
I think the biggest challenge is an early DM, and I've been DMing for about 2 years now. So I
Mm.
think one of the biggest challenges early on was being confident and knowing what I was doing. And so a reality of Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and even with the 2024 handbook that came out, is that there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of sub rules. There's a lot of rules lawyering that can happen with players if they think it should turn out a certain way. And so I think one of the challenges was like knowing what to do and how to do it. And that does require a little bit of research. But even when playing a game, sometimes the rules just need to be adapted or changed or rewarded.
Mhm.
I, as a GM, tend to want to reward players for creative storytelling and unorthodox solutions. Does it kind of undermine some of the original rules of 5e
Mhm.
from Wizards of the Coast? Probably the yes. But if the goal of playing this game is to get people to play again, there
Yeah.
is, I think, some room for flexibility with bending or breaking a rule, but it's knowing what rules you're bending and breaking. So I think early on, my bigger stressors were like, am I DMing correctly?
Yeah.
A way to work through that as a DM or GM is just acknowledging that I'm not going to know all the rules at all times, or if a
Yeah.
weird rule comes up or an outlier case occurs, it's being okay with, hey, that's a great question. Let me think about that. And I might Google a
Mhm.
solution, or I might say, hey, that's a great idea. Let's come back to that. What are you doing? And as they're
Mhm.
doing that, I Google a solution, or I makeshift a good enough solution of like, okay, how do you do a high jump or a long jump? Okay, there's technically rules on that, but we only have 20 minutes before this session's over. We're going to truncate this and call this an athletics check. It's knowing enough about the rules of a game to say, okay, what's the simplest way of solving this, even if there
Mhm.
are other ways of traditionally managing it.
Yeah, yeah. That's also, being a that kind of good DM or a new DM or even being a flexible DM creates a kind of memorable moments in your playtime, and it also depends, of course, depends on people you're playing with. But so, do you have any kind of those kind of memorable moments or encounters like from one of your games that stands out
Mhm.
to you? Or
So I'm trying to think of like when I'm playing these games, I think what's been most exciting is like even like running a game I ran just like last week. I had an assumption about how players were going to play and use the mechanics. And I think I
hmm
was really humbled as I was playing that one, players will do things that don't fit the constructs of a game. And even running games for 2 years, I think I know what they're going to do. But what ends up happening is that they come up with a different idea. They
hmm
interpret a spell, like the tech magic, to do something slightly different. And so when you reward that, sometimes they roll in D&D, there's a D20 dice, and and sometimes
yeah,
they roll the highest number possible. And when they roll a natural 20, I don't want players to be disappointed in what gets revealed, because
yeah,
they
yeah.
are all playing under the same auspices of probability and curiosity and luck. And so if something lucky occurs and it's not rewarded, it can be decentivizing. And so as a DM,
Hmm.
I thankfully was equipped. And so I was running a game, and the character does a detect magic and they reveal a new character. And fortunately, I prepped it and had this new character. So I pull out like a giant, like 1 foot, giant 1 foot by 6 inch, like tree onto tree mini, and plop it in the middle of the table and say, this is who you meet as a result of this roll, because they rolled a very high roll. And so I
Hmm.
think when we are caught off guard, it is being prepared. But then even if I'm not prepared, it's saying, hey, something's happening, and next session you're going to see what's going to occur. So I think if we aren't
Hmm.
sure how to solve a problem, we can always say, come back next week as well.
Yeah. That's a perfect solution actually for most games. And it also leave you at a cliffhanger. So moving on, since we have a few minutes. So you also play some games in Turkey, in Istanbul, especially Turkish TTRPG communities,
Mhm.
and you were in one of the events that we are also running off. So, how did you discover the Turkish TTRPG community, and what's been your experience with it so far?
So how I discovered the TTRPG community in Turkey was, I think, on a previous trip, because I was in Turkey in the summer of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier that year, actually earlier last year in February of 2023, I was visiting Turkey and found a game store. So Goblin Club was just sort of a place I ran into and kind of checked it out and visited, but then did a little bit of online research, found the Instagram page, found the Discord. And when I saw that an event was running and I was going to be around that summer, I was going to say, hey, I'm going to be here this summer. Are you all looking for a DM? And thankfully, the organization was really flexible and was able to collaborate and connect with the DMing
Mm-hmm.
community. And so through a game store, connecting through the TTRPG community in general, I was able to step in. And I think it was a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting and meaningful and fun and rewarding experience. So when I ran my first game in Turkey, I think what
Oh.
was really exciting was that players were really curious. Players were really flexible. Players were also very knowledgeable. And so I ran a game I played before, but I didn't actually know how players would engage it or how they would problem solve or how they would role play. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly there are rules I bent or nuanced or had to like kind of search in real time, but then there are also really great solutions that players produce. And so I think my experience of Turkish gaming culture is that it's new, but because it's new, it's curious, it's exciting, it's
Mm-hmm.
adventurous, it's risk taking in a way that puts me as a DM on my toes. And so it keeps me prepared. So I think I would say that the TTRPG community in Turkey is playful and curious, and I think growing and willing to like
Mm-hmm.
kind of push the edges on things to see what opens up.
Mm-hmm. So, are there any kind of a notable differences between the Turkish and American TTRPG community, or at least Boston community that you have observed? Because, like, as far as I see, like we do different things, different event schedules, different event, let's say that like almost everything are feels different to me. But what you think about it, like?
I mean, well, now that I've spent time playing both in Turkey and in the US, I think there's a lot of shared experiences. Like the
Hmm.
classic BBEG, the big bad evil guy, is not the monster that DM or GM creates, but it's actually scheduling. And so getting everybody in the same room in the same place at the same time can be challenging. I've had the privilege of being at home games in the US and in Turkey, as well as playing games in third spaces and third places. I think what's interesting is that in Boston, those third places tend to be pubs, breweries.
Mm-hmm.
Less, there are some game spaces in Boston, but I noticed when I was in Istanbul, in Kadıköy, it was definitely the game cafes were the third places. I was
Mm-hmm.
invited to people's homes, which is a lovely privilege, but I think a lot of those third places are rather than going to bars and restaurants, maybe it is a coffee shop as an outlier, but
Mm-hmm.
it was commonly these game cafes, game gallery, Goblin Club. These places were really cool, and I think
Mm-hmm.
where to play was interesting. Also, access to tools and resources. But
Mm-hmm.
this is the same like even in U.S. culture. Like D&D is commonly theater of the mind, but can also where you use imagination to tell a story. But also you can have minis and a map and things like that. And I was really excited to bring those tools and resources. It's a hobby of mine now to paint 28 millimeter miniatures. I've enjoyed doing that. But
Mm-hmm.
some tables will have lots of those things in Turkey, and some of these tables did not have many of those things. Also, just lugging things around can be a burden. But playing in Boston, it kind of varied. Some of the tables I played at have all these supplies, and some of them would also play theater of the mind. And I think it's a reminder that regardless of how a table played, as long as you had a willing group of people, whether it's the players as well as the GM, you can tell a really great story. And even
Mm-hmm.
just cultural differences. I think regardless of whether English is a first or second language, I come in playing as an English player. If I knew Turkish, I'd have a very different experience. But playing with English speakers as a first language, there's an ease and a way of playing with nuance. But even with my friends who are English as a second language, there was an excitement and curiosity. There's an eagerness because they did the labor to make the game real
Mm-hmm.
fun, and then made it easier
Yeah.
for me, knowing that I can adapt and know that everyone's doing due diligence. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
what's surprising is that even though there are differences proportionate to culture and time zone and really delicious food, I think there's a lot of similarities because there's an eagerness, I think, on both sides as D&D and tabletop role player games are kind of getting more center stage lighting because of pop culture making them more relevant, more
Yeah.
noticeable.
Mm-hmm. Especially Tulumba is our like plus points, right?
Yes.
So moving on that. So I'm gonna ask you some personal questions. So what do
Sure.
you do on a daily basis, and how do you balance your love for TTRPGs with other aspects of your life? That's my
So
question.
yeah, that's great. So my work-life balance is really interesting. I work a full-time job in the States as a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, these days at my therapy practice, I'm able to integrate my hobbies. And so I run a Dungeons and Dragons therapy group once a week and try. This is the first pilot of the series and seeing how it takes off. The research
Mm-hmm.
shows that there's research that exists that shows it's meaningful, but
Mm-hmm.
how do I balance my work life? And so I work 30 hours a week and have clear boundaries on when I'm done with work. I can go home and do
Mm-hmm.
something else. And this is hanging out with my friends from church. This is playing music. This is going rock climbing. This is working on art commissions or playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm a
Oh.
planner, which can be very culturally challenging in different contexts. But I send out an email once a month saying actually I'm an auto email sending out to our
Uh-huh.
here in Boston. Hey, I'm going to run a game and I'm going to run a game. And here are the 5 dates I can play. To email me back with the times that you can play, and I'll coordinate a table from there. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm on the side of personality of planning and scheduling ahead. And so as soon as I can get that out there and have people kind of think about it in advance, it's a lot
Yeah.
easier for me. That doesn't get to include everybody because some people are more spontaneous, but if I'm the one running the games, I can set the pace. And so
Mm-hmm.
I guess to manage my work-life balance, it's making sure I schedule things that are meaningful, whether if it's like personal, mental health, spiritual practices, or it is spending time with my friends and connecting with them. I think it's just being able to say, I look at a calendar, block out what's a priority, and then
Mm-hmm.
offer those things to others as they can jump in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's ask you that. What's your favorite book on fun fantasy fiction, and why does it resonate with you? And also, do you have a favorite board game? Two
Okay,
in one question.
so let's so favorite board game. Oh man, that's really funny. So if I'm not playing D&D, I guess if I had to choose a board game, I actually it's funny. I don't know if I can choose a favorite board game because I actually do not play a lot of them. But if I had to shoot from the hip, I'm probably gonna say Ticket the Ride. That's a quick, safe bet of an enjoyable
Mm-hmm.
game. And then the other question, what can you remind me of the question again, Amir?
Of course, of course. Favorite book on fantasy fiction.
Okay, so science fiction. What's the last? Let's put it this way: the last piece of science fiction I read was actually this summer, and it was the Call of
No, no.
Cthulhu.
I was asking of
Cthulhu.
fantasy fiction
Oh,
or yeah,
oh,
fantasy.
fantasy.
Oh,
If it's about
science.
if it's about favorite fantasy,
You can also answer me science because I need that as well.
yeah, so I guess it's funny. I'm trying to think of like favorite. I guess high fantasy, Silmarillion.
Uh-huh.
That was the last book I read, and it does lead into
Oh.
like my favorite side of like high fantasy. I do like the world of elves and gnomes and dragons and fairies. I think that's stuff I'm really into. And so I think the last one of the last things in high fantasy I read was the Silmarillion from Tolkien, and that was a really
Oh yeah.
rewarding experience. I read it mainly for world building, but it does just tell an interesting like history and lore, which is helpful for gaming and
Mm-hmm.
TTRPG. So it's kind of professional development type of kind of recreation as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, do you have any other favorite? TTRPG system, or
The
like
systems.
what is
So
it? Why do you prefer it
yeah,
other
so I
than
think
D&D?
outside of 5e and the
Mm-hmm.
2024 handbook that came out, and which I'm going to get into reading soon, I think the other system I really appreciated was Kids on Brooms or Kids on Bikes.
Oh yeah.
That's a really
Yeah.
interesting system because it's more about role play. And it kind of is very, in my experience, very kid friendly. And so the
Yes, it
mechanics
is.
are kind of spelled out in a more simplistic fashion. It kind of simplifies the functions of the dice, and it's really about telling a story with fewer rules.
Yeah.
Whereas the 5e is a lovely experience, but there's a lot of expectations and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
endearingly a lot of hand holding by the DM for first time and newer players until they get their bearings.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more things I as a DM have to keep up with on 5e. But when I play Kids on Brooms or Kids on Bikes or variations of it, it's easier to keep up with because the way that the stats are organized and the dice rolls are much simpler. And it's I played this with kids while I was in Turkey this summer, and that was really rewarding. But if I had to choose a secondary system that I'd like to learn more about or play, that's different than 5e, it would definitely be Kids on Bikes, Kids on Brooms.
Perfect. Perfect choice. Thank you. So, as a conclusion, your final thoughts. What advice would you give to someone who's new to TTRPGs or D&D, or like interested in becoming a dungeon master?
I think
Final
what I would
advice.
I think what I would like to put out there is that being a player of these games is really fun. Don't get me wrong. It's actually one of my preferred stations because I get to have less responsibility. But I think what's been rewarding about being a DM is that I can tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of come up with an idea from beginning, middle, and end, and have people join and participate. It's kind of a way of gathering people. These are who are the hosts in our lives who can create community and make meaningful connection. And I think what makes me excited about GMing is that I can foster community and I can
Mm-hmm.
make new connections and have people meet who have never met before and kind of make new friends. And so if you're interested in building community, making new friends, telling a story and having other people tell a story with you, one that you plan, and maybe even one that's better than you intended, then I think being a GM or a DM is like a good thing to try.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm thanking you. Thank you so much for having me and having you, and we're meeting together on this Tavern Talks. It was an absolute pleasure to see your viewpoints and chat about your journey into your world of tabletop RPGs and also discussions. So I really thank you for helping me on this project and on this first episode of Tavern Talks.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I hope to come back soon.
So have a great day, and all of you viewers, see you on next episode.